I got to fly against all the NATO F-16s. I got to fly against U.S. Air Force F-15s, F-16s, Hornets, Tomcats, Marines, Navy, the Brits, the French and the Mirage 2000s. If they were in Europe, we got to fly against them.
Hello and welcome to the Fighter Pilot Podcast. I'm your host, Vincent Aiello, callsign Jello, and I hope you have enjoyed our pivot to video in 2023. We've had several episodes now, and most of them are recorded right here in our studios in San Diego, but we're trying something different this week. Now, our Patreon supporters for the last couple of years have had access to dozens of interviews that are casual and just fun, and we call them happy hours. Well, for this week, we are going to repurpose one of those with a gentleman named Fred Clifton, who is a former Air Force fighter pilot, flew a lot of different aircraft, including the MiG-29 Fulcrum, and we're going to adapt that for this episode. Now, it was recorded on Zoom, so the audio and video quality is not quite as good, but I think you're really going to enjoy the content and the discussion. So let's get to it.
Fred Clifton, Spanky, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. You got neon lights on and everything back there, so I like it.
This is my man cave. Like one of the few houses in the entire Las Vegas Valley that actually has a basement.
Is that, yeah? Oh, wow. It's probably cooler down there.
In a way.
Yeah. All right. Well, just to set the stage here, so we're just meeting, but you were featured on, what is the name of that newsletter? I've got it right here in this email. It's like something Fighters, Classic Fighter Association. That's what it is.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and I read about this guy named Spanky who had flown, F-18 or something, F-16, and then, then he went and did a tour flying Fulcrums.
Yeah.
All right. So how did all this work out? Tell us about you.
Just a career single-seat knuckle dragger. Started off in the F-15 and then flew F-5s in one of our aggressor squadrons, then converted to the F-16. Took off time from the Viper to first off go to language school, learn how to mumble in German, and then flew the Fulcrum for 2.5 years, and then went back to the Viper for another 6 after that. And then finally retired in December of 2004. Wow.
I might have been confusing. I think you were talking about fighting the F-18, but I guess maybe you probably didn't fly it.
No, I've gotten one ride in the backseat of an F model. That's my experience.
Oh, well, that's relatively recent. The F's only been around for 20 years.
Yeah, one of the guys I flew with in my last assignment was actually a Navy guy. And he was dual qualified in the F-16, and also he was flying the E models, E and Fs at VX9 at China Lake.
Okay.
And he's retired now, but he's still flying F-18s for Boeing.
Oh, wow. That's not a bad gig, except does he have to live in St. Louis?
No, he lives in Pax River.
Oh, okay. Good. Well, that's cool. So I remember, what years were you flying the Fulcrum?
96 to 98, 2.5 years.
Okay. See, I bet I knew of you way back then, because that was like the curtain had just kind of come down, and we were starting to get reports from, I guess, it was probably the East Germans that we first got to, right, formerly, got to know what they were doing. And then we had folks like you go and do exchange tours. And before we knew it, all kinds of good information was coming out about the fighters. So I don't know. I'm interested in knowing about your experiences, but I don't really know where to begin, Fred.
Well, kind of my first exposure to the Fulcrum was through intel briefings when I was a young punk F-15 pilot from 83 to 87. Of course, the airplane was first being fielded, and of course we were getting fuzzy images and intel reports guessing on what it could and couldn't do. And then when I went to the aggressors, as you're going through the aggressor training course, every guy was assigned a topic, an academic topic that you had to prepare a briefing for. And in those days, the Air Force aggressors, we should go on road shows. About half the you were gone about half the year. You'd go out, you'd take a 6-ship, probably 8 pilots and a couple of GCI controllers to different bases and fly DACT against those guys. And then you would take your academic briefing. So here you were walking out to your F5 with your classified academic briefing, and you'd stuff in the nose of the airplane in the gun bay. And my academic subject was the MiG-29 and the Su-27.
Oh, wow.
So, I read all this stuff and all these intel reports, and later, my first assignment in the F-16 was to Misawa Air Base, Japan. And in the summer times, we would deploy because sea fog, you basically had about a 3 or 4 hour fly window. Otherwise, you were, walks off. So I got a chance to see a MiG-29 when they were doing their goodwill tours to the U.S. back in the early 90s. And I got to get up and sit in it. And then, lo and behold, in 95, actually, I was flying F-16s at Pope Air Force Base, of all places. Pope had always been an airlift base.
Okay.
But for whatever reason, post-Desert Storm, we moved 2 fighter squadrons in there, an S-15 squadron and an A-10 squadron. And we had 2 C-130 squadrons. What do you do with this mix? Don't know. Yeah, we made up some stuff that we thought we could do with that mixture, but it looked good on paper. But no, we never got to actually try it. But at those days, Air Combat Command, Air Force owns all the U.S.-based fighters. And they had a policy because of the, reduction in forces after Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. You could only have 3 field graders, majors and above, in a squadron. Mm-hmm. But the initial cadre of guys at this squadron in Pope were all really experienced guys. And I made major while I was there, and I wasn't one of the top 3. The squadron commander, the operations officer, and the assistant operations officer. So I had to start looking for a new job. Writing was on a wall. So I was walking in the squadron one day, and a guy met me walking out and asked me if I'd seen the MiG-29 exchange assignment posted on the Air Force want ads. The Air Force in those days would put available job listings on the internet. And you could go apply for them. So no, I missed that one. Because my first choice was they were bringing back the SR-71.
That's right.
Not a fighter, but I think it'd be cool to go Mach 3 plus. But the prerequisite was prior SR-71 time, which excluded me. So I went and applied for the MiG-29 job, and lo and behold, I was the first guy picked out of the hat.
Wow.
And so I got.
You talked about real quick going back. Did you go get your feet sandy in Desert Storm? You talked a little bit about that, or
I'm sorry. Say again.
Were you in Desert Storm? You talked about.
I was stationed in Misawa at the time, and
okay.
Pacific Air Forces. I think we sent 1 fighter squadron to the war, and that was an F-4 G Wild Weasel squadron. About 3 weeks after it started.
Okay.
They ran out of weasel.
They never tell stories. I'm just trying to silence something here in the background. They never tell stories about the home guard, right? When everyone else is going out and doing all the shooting. But the fact is, there's a lot of people like you that had to still be on watch, if you will, back home and didn't get to go out and get their boots sandy. So
the funny thing was, kind of like, the Navy on a carrier has the air boss. In the Air Force, right. We have supervisor of flying. Put a guy up in the pilot up in the tower, 3 or 4 hour shift, and you run the flying op. And I was up in the tower that morning, so we're about 10 hours ahead. So it was mid morning or so, and we were launching recovering airplanes between snowstorms. And I got a phone call. It was my wife, and she was on. She'd been watching CNN and said that the war had started. And I'm kind of dejected because now here's a war, and I'm sitting up in the tower watching airplanes take off and land in between snowstorms. A couple of minutes later, the squadron hotline lit up. I picked it up, and it was our squadron weapons and tactics officer, the guy that would go on to become a 4-star general. Anyway, he called me up, says, "Hey, Spanky, the war's on. We're not there, so our careers are over." And I think because he became a 4-star general, he was just being nice, telling me my career was over His not so much. And then all the air control was run by the Japanese, and they had a fighter wing at the base also. So the Japanese hotline lit up. The watch supervisor picked up the phone, and they were speaking Japanese, and he brought over the rest of the crew, and they went secure, which meant channel 1 for them. And I spoke almost no Japanese, but they were talking for a couple of seconds. Then the tower supervisor came over and congratulated me on a successful first strike. I couldn't get more dejected than that.
Yeah, congratulations, Spanky. Other people, not you, just got the chance to finally go, right? Because I don't know, I talk about on the Fighter Pilot podcast, I don't want war, but if there's going to be war, I'd like to see my medal, right? Test it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, you don't want to sit at the home guard. So, all right, but somebody had to do it, and you were one of them. Sorry, bud. Oh, dear. Yeah, but then they're just rubbing mud on you, too. Okay. Well, anyway, so getting back to it. So you get picked to go do this thing, and you said something earlier about some language school. But yeah, I don't know. Let's talk about what that experience was like, because it's foreign to me, and I guess that's probably a bad pun. But it must have been pretty cool.
The criteria for the job was to be an Air Force Weapons School graduate, which I had done in the F-16. And actually, I did it when they still had the F word on the side of the building, fighter. It's no longer the fighter school, it's just now the weapons school.
That's right.
But
you kind of glossed over that earlier, by the way. That's like a big deal to get accepted at 6 months of your life there, Spanky. So
yeah,
don't be too modest now. Come on.
But yeah, it was a great opportunity, and being a graduate of the weapons school, it opens up a lot of doors that aren't normally open to, I hate to say the masses, because there's some great fighter pilots out there that aren't weapons school graduates. It's got to be something you want to do and want to be able to put up with. But anyway, the first thing, obviously, a weapons school graduate, and you had to pass the Defense Language Aptitude Battery Test. And I grew up mostly in El Paso, Texas. And in El Paso, because of our proximity to the border, we had to take Spanish from 1st through 7th grade, and I couldn't put a complete sentence together in Spanish. Even if you held a gun in my head,
despite 7 years of academics.
Anyway, so I went into this room, and they sat down at this desk, and they had a tape recorder and a cassette player on a long lead with a proctor at the desk up in front of the classroom, and I put the headsets on, and she pushed play. And they had this made-up language, and it sounded like a mixture of Arabic and Tagalog, the Filipino language. And they'd give you a rule 1, and you'd start off with rule 1, and based on this, and you had these multiple choice questions. What was the gist of this sentence, or what did they mean here? And then about 10 questions with rule 1, and then you would introduce rule 2, and then that was an additive to rule 1, and you just kept going. You always got to about rule 10. It was about 50, 60 questions, and I got, I busted this. I'm not going to go to German fly MiG-29. So I turned the test in, and she graded it, and I did pass. So long story short, ended up driving from North Carolina with a wife, 2 kids, 2 dogs, to Monterey, California.
Oh, wow.
And people go, well, you're stationed in Monterey. I go, oh, what a great deal. I go, I didn't get to see it. It was academic, is the hardest thing I've ever done.
Really?
Yeah. And
that's saying a lot.
What?
That's saying a lot, considering you went to the weapons school.
I took it seriously, because I didn't want to seem like the fifth wheel in the squadron when I got there, that I couldn't communicate unless they spoke to me in English. And I knew that some portion of the squadron were going to be former East Germans, and they were going to have the English language capabilities that the former West German guys did. So I took it seriously. There was a guy, also an F-16 fighter weapons school graduate. He was going through the Dutch school at the same time. He was always out on the golf course. But there was myself, the class of 10, and I didn't think I was going to do very well. The class of 10, myself, and a Navy SEAL, we were the 2 guys in the corner with the dunce cants on. But in the end, I ended up graduating number one in the class, which
Wow.
what is the standards? I felt pretty confident going into the job when the first day I got to the squadron, the flight took me into Berlin. They sent two guys down. The squadron was on the north coast in the Baltic. The Laga Air Base, the biggest town close by was Rostock, which was a major port town pre and post and during and post World War II. And it's where the Heinkel aircraft factory was at during World War II.
Uh-huh.
So I showed up in the squadron the first day, feeling pretty confident about my German. So I got a dose of reality. The speed, the slang, everything. It took me a couple of months to finally start to catch on a little bit. But by the end, I could stand up in front of the squadron or go places and teach academics all in German.
Wow. Well, that's saying a lot.
What?
Well, sorry, Frankie, or Spanky. That's saying a lot because it's one thing to learn, I'd like some milk and cheese or whatever. It's another to talk the particular jargon of fighter pilots. So,
in fact, the last squadron reunion I went to was 2018. I was the keynote speaker.
wow.
So I managed to keep it up a little bit.
Good for you.
But the jet itself, because I'd flown it, or not flown it, but I'd studied it as an aggressor, obviously simulated. Right. And the fact that the Russians produced the Su-27 and the MiG-29, two kind of fourth gen airplanes. But what were a couple of the factors that sounded the death knell in the F-5 as an adversary airplane in the Air Force. The F-5 just could not simulate the capabilities of those two airplanes. True, they couldn't, either avionics-wise, weapon system-wise, kinematically, not up to speed. I still think the F-5 is a great adversary airplane. But when I finally got to the squadron, I got there in the evening and got my first flight the next morning.
Wow.
That was the backseat of a two-holer, but still, the U.S. Air Force, they make you sit around and wait for a month or something like that. I don't know if it's written somewhere, but it's just kind of become standard practice. And but got a ride and then started the checkout fairly quickly after that, because when I came into the squadron, I had a little over 2,500 hours of fighter time, which made me the most experienced fighter pilot on the base.
Oh my goodness.
So they decided to give me an abbreviated checkout, which consisted of, I did the transition phase, the entire phase, which was about 5 rides, which included, some simulators, sorties, normal procedures, emergency procedures, instrument flying, standard stuff. And of course, the same thing in the airplane. And then a solo flight in the single seater. And then once I was done with that, the BFM phase I did in one day. I got an offensive, defensive, and a neutral BFM ride, in all in one day. And then the next time I flew, I got a 1-versus-1 intercept ride, so that get used to the airplane and flying and doing the radarology all at the same time. Which, we've done in the sim, but it's just different. As you know, flying simulators does not replace flying an airplane.
Oh yeah. And
then after that, you're done. Oh, by the way, we got a 4-versus-4 against some Danish F-16. Want to lead? Well, it's been a year or so since I've actually led a 4-ship. So I'm gonna pass. I'll gladly fly anywhere else in the flight. I just don't want to lead. So I ended up flying as, I think, number 4. Okay. And I think the last 4-ship I flew anywhere other than as number 1.
Wow. Well, I mean, goodness, you just spent all that time at the Language Institute. Plus, it's a foreign country with a language barrier with the Danes, too, probably, and everything else. They just want to throw you right in the fire. That's hilarious.
Well,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Their transition syllabus was built so that you came out the other end as you were a MiG-29 flight lead.
Oh, okay.
The only way into the squadron is you had to be an F-4 flight lead before you come in the squadron. No new guy no tornado pilots or anything like that. Just F4 guys only, except for the prior former East German guys. They all came out of the MiG-21.
Sure. So these are guys in their upper 20s, lower 30s, probably pretty experienced by then.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, but hold on, Spanky. So I was the threat aircraft SME at Top Gun. I was there from 2000 to 2002. And at the time, part one of my 3-part lecture was MiG-29. I mean, that was the percentage 4th gen threat. Part 2 was the Su-27. And as I was leaving there, I think they shifted that around and realized the flanker is probably the bigger threat, figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember among many is just little things like the way the attitude reference indicator worked, or the way that the radar was mechanized was, I don't want to say not intuitive, but for Western trained pilots, it just seemed queer to me. And I use that word sometimes that people don't like, but if you stick to its original meaning. But what was it like for you? I mean, was the attitude reference like when you were in IMC, did it take some thinking or did it not bother you?
First, it was bass backwards because in our airplane, the horizon on your attitude indicator is always parallel with the horizon. As you know, it's not the case in the MiG-29. Right. It's always parallel to the wings. So that was a little disconcerting at first, but you get used to it, and it becomes a non-issue. Same thing with the radar mech. Yeah, it's complicated, but muscle memory is muscle memory. And once you get used to it, there were enough changes in the symbology and the heads-up display that looking at that and kind of knowing where you started, you could move a switch left or right a couple of clicks and know exactly what radar mode you were in.
Right.
And of course, with the helmet-mounted sight, which I flew with religiously, unless I was going out on a cross-country or an instrument sortie, because it's basically the best thing we had going for us. It was simple. It's not like the joint helmet-mounted cueing system.
Right. It was like a monocle, right?
With a couple of concentric circles, but even that symbology changes based on where you're at in your lock-on status and whether you're within weapons parameters, and also once you got inside of typically 10 miles, you would select what's called the co-op mode, which ties all the sensors, and I'll include the helmet as a sensor, all that together. So you never had to go back down in the cockpit. You moved your head around, and as good a weapon and pilot or sensor and pilot interface of any airplane I've ever flown inside of about 10 miles. Outside of it was busy, but after you did it for a while, it became a non-issue as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And that says a lot, right? Because that, if I remember correctly, became operational in about 1984. So this is late 70s technology. I mean,
it is.
And I remember the helmet-mounted sight and the Archer was like the big threat. Like now this guy can look off foresight at us and hit us. So that dictated a lot of our tactics, at least in the Hornet community.
Well, if we could survive the merge, of course, our radar-guided missile, the AA-10 Alpha, very good missile inside its kinematic capability. In fact, in the summer of 2003, we had 7 or 8 German MiG-29s down at Eglin Air Force Base, and we shot missiles off of them. Instrumented, and the AA-10 Alpha, inside its kinematic capability, very good. Unfortunately, it's a semi-active missile, very short range compared to even an AIM-7, for example. But if we could survive the merge and we had the SA to execute and prosecute the merge, with the helmet-mounted sight and your Archer, you were sharp in a feeding frenzy.
And that was the genesis, going back to the beginning of our conversation, of your little article write-up in the Classic Fighter Association, was you were, by then, experienced in the Eagle, the Viper, and now the Fulcrum. And so you were drawing parallels, and a weapons school graduate, of how it fought compared to how the other aircraft fought. So just, I don't know, give us some parallels there as far as, and did you, I'm sure you got to fight Danish F-16s and probably Dutch F-16s, or maybe Americans, but how did the Fulcrum do?
It depended on the scenario, but let me back up just a little bit.
Sure, absolutely.
Basics. From beyond visual range, totally outclassed by all our 4th gen fighters.
Because of radar and missiles, or because of
radar? The radar, the MiG-29's radar was actually fairly good.
slot back, I think one.
Plays, our radars not only help in the launch of weapons, but they're there to increase the pilot's situational awareness. What's going on around you? The MiG-29's displays, they were there for weapons aiming only. Situational awareness, that belonged to the GCI controller on the ground. The pilot was a stick and throttle actuator. Everything you ever read about that is true. But again, totally outclassed. But the tables turned a little bit when you survived and made it to emerge because of the AIM or the A-11 and the helmet mounted sight. Now I got to fly against all the NATO F-16s. I got to fly against U.S. Air Force F-15s, F-16s, Hornets, Tomcats, Marines, Navy, the Brits, the French, and the Mirage 2000s. If they were in Europe, we got to fly against them. Miramar, they used to have the sign outside that said Fighter Town, USA.
Uh-huh.
There was some talk about on our transit ramp there in Laga Air Base, putting, Fighter Town Laga. Because the ramp, everyone wanted that. And again, you kind of alluded to that in the late 90s, the MiG-29, it was the threat of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Su-27 was coming in the limitation of the Su-27 was just numbers. They had not produced enough that we really considered that the primary threat. And in the early 2000s, that became the primary threat, and we kind of poo-pooed the MiG-29. In emerge, or just going out and doing BFM against any of those. A lot of guys described it as a Hornet on steroids. Great alpha, but kind of, block 30 F-16, big mouth block 30 F-16 thrust away.
Wow.
I could go over the top at 150 knots. Where in an F-16, I would need about 250.
Mm-hmm.
Where and the big difference is, I think the F-16 has a little bit better thrust away, a little bit. Both aircraft are limited to the same alpha, but the MiG-29's alpha limiter, you can pull through it. It's a soft stop. So you could get up to whatever the airplane would give you, 30, 35, 40 degrees of alpha, and just use that power to motor around, over the top of a loop and really surprise people.
Yeah. Oh, I bet.
And, but it didn't. I'll use the F-16 as my baseline because that's most of my fighter experience.
Okay.
The F-16 is known for sustained turn rate capability. The MiG-29 cannot match that. And a little bit better instantaneous turn rate on the charts. The problem with that instantaneous turn rate in an airplane like a MiG-29 has no overg protection. I could pull the black out of the stick and bend the airplane. So if you want to get her to pull 9 Gs when you maybe have 12 available and exploit that instantaneous turn rate that you might have, you got to be real careful.
Yeah.
And but it was a harder of the 4 airplanes I flew. It was the hardest to fly well. The flight control system was sloppy, imprecise. It has a stability augmentation system that was always trying to fight you for control of the airplane. So once you learn the nuances, those became second nature. But as you're learning the airplane, it just made for surprises. And the other thing is the single-seater was a very forgiving airplane. You could do stupid pilot tricks all the live long day. And the airplane was not going to bite you. The 2-seater, you needed to be careful.
Really?
Depart at relatively low alpha, high speed, it would go in a direction it wanted to go.
Was that because of the canopy or a shift in center of gravity? Because the Fulcrum B didn't have a radar, as I recall.
I think it's the shape of the airplane in front of the wing line.
Okay.
The leading edge wing, because the front seater and the 2-seater sitting about where all the electronics for the radar would be. And of course, there is no radar in the B model. There is one, it's a radar altimeter, but no air-to-air radar. They're not very pointed. different shape. So I think aerodynamically that impacted some of the handling characteristics.
Yeah. And yet, if I remember correctly, and I used to mention this in my lecture, in fact, I'm sitting here going through all this stuff in my head, and I say, I wonder how much of this is still classified, because I got to be careful. But I think the only air-to-air kill of a Fulcrum is a Fulcrum B, and that was a Cuban one that shot down like some freedom fighter Cessna over the strait, or whatever you call the water between Cuba and Florida. Do you remember that? Like 25, 30 years ago?
90s. The Cuban 29 shot down 2 Cessna 337s.
Yeah.
Some Cuban expatriates had flown to Cuba to try to pick up their families or something, and they got shot down. I think
I thought it was from a Fulcrum B.
Yeah, I think a MiG-29 over Georgia, not like Atlanta, Georgia, but Georgia and Europe, shot down a drone.
Yeah, well, that doesn't count in my book.
No, but it kills. We always say it kills a kill.
Yeah, true. I guess they counted them against balloons and V-1 rockets in earlier wars. But hey, let's go back to so I'm thinking of like a 1960s race car where there was no electronics, no traction control, no throttle control. Right? You put a driver in that race car, and I'm no race car driver, but I'm just guessing at this. And skill matters. It sounds to me like some of the modern fighters are a little bit more forgiving with the flight control logic and different things, and can maybe level the playing field a little bit. Whereas it sounds like in the Fulcrum, some skill was definitely required because it was like that older race car. It was more just rubber to the road kind of thing.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, maybe like a late 1960s Cobra.
I was thinking that.
It's just pure muscle.
Too much power, not enough weight. Exactly. Yeah. Wow. What about the rest of the aircraft, though? Like I've heard, and I've seen one or two up close, but I don't remember vaguely. But workmanship, right? Like an F-16 is beautiful. Let's face it, and it's well built. I was always told the Russian aircraft were more just kind of, like grunt and
they're built like
together with a hammer.
Surprisingly, the MiG-29 has some fairly high-tech materials in it. But what I've said and written at times is like Ivan Ivanovich was given a ball peen hammer, and he would take a piece of sheet metal and bend it around some ribs and formers and stuff like that. And Dmitri with his rivet gun would come in and rivet. And it looked like that, but it reminds me of a story. I just remember what was the exercise? Not the exercise. It was an operation in Europe over Bosnia, deny flight.
I was going to say Allied Force, but that was before, I guess.
Yeah, Allied Forces. When it went before that.
Yeah,
it was deny flight, and there was a Marine F-18 squadron deployed to Aviano Air Base in Italy, and they got a break and decided to come up and fly against us for a week. At the end of the week, we typically had a party, exchange gifts, and drink beer.
Shocking.
And, we invited the wives out, and there was a Hornet and a Fulcrum parked right next to each other. And one of the former East German wives pulled me to the side. She goes, "God, how can that F-18 be so smooth? And look how rumply that MiG-29 looks." And it's like I beat it with a ball peen hammer. And I've taken an airplane to Spangdahlem Air Base, which is in the southwest corner of Germany, the F-16s, and had 2 F-16 squadrons, an F-15 squadron, and an A-10 squadron at the time. And I had to go there for some, I can't remember the reason, but because of the uniqueness of the airplane, the transient aircraft crews weren't trained necessarily to work on those. And what we had to do as a MiG-29 pilot before we take one off station is we went through a day-long course with our maintenance guys on how to service the jet. Fuel, hydraulics, oil, and actually had pneumatic brakes like a Mack truck of all. So anyway, I was out there and they had contract transient guys, and one of them was a German. He had to, these basically told me the handwork of this airplane looks like crap. I go, yeah, it does, but it does what it does. And Yeah, it's a fairly solid airplane. And if you took care of it, it was fairly reliable. And if you let maintenance go, then it's like all other jets. If it's going to sit, it's going to end up sitting. If you fly it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of flying it, so I derailed your discussion there. But if you were in your Fulcrum and you met another guy like you with some experience in a patch, and I don't know, you could just work through the different aircraft. But how did it do? I mean, and also I guess depends on what you consider winning, right? I mean, the first shot or getting at the guy 6 o'clock. But I don't know. Just tell some stories when you fought Eagles and Vipers and Hornets and all that, and Tomcats.
Against an Eagle, you had a thrust rate advantage. You had a sustained turn rate advantage. I'm going to fly just like I'm going to fly an F-16. You try to keep the turn rate up, knowing that if I need to, and I beat him down on energy, I'm fairly soon going to have exclusive use of the vertical, and I can do whatever I want to. Do loops around him. But an F-15. But flown by a very good F-15 pilot, you need to bring your A game. It's a good BFM machine.
Yeah.
The F-16, that was a hard fight.
Okay.
F-16, the C models with the GE engines had a slight thrust weight advantage, but also a significant sustained turn rate advantage. So you wanted to get the F-16 slow if you could. And of course, anytime you say, I need to drive the fight in this direction, it's kind of like pushing the rope a little bit. You can't make the decisions for that pilot. But you had to be careful. You didn't want to get too slow yourself. And the MiG-29, in the best case, only has about 160-degree roll rate, 160 degrees seconds per roll rate. So it's relatively slow.
Yeah.
Little teeny ailerons. If you get slow, then being able to reposition your lift vector, your roll rate gets down to about 20 degrees per second, which is, a Cessna 152 can do that.
You got to think ahead.
But again, if you could take advantage of your alpha, the alpha advantage that you have over an F-16, I would do that. And I would fly against an F-16 differently. Hey, the only kills that count today are guns. I would fly the airplane much differently than, everything's on the table. If everything's on the table, the helmet out of sight and the archer, I would just, regardless of how I merged with the F-16, I would turn in the shortest direction, pull the black out of the stick within an archer was, and kill him.
Wake up, see where he is, and shoot him.
Yeah. The Hornet was a tough fight, as all Hornets are. You always need to mind your P's and Q's around the Hornet because of their great alpha capability. So a lot of times those fights ended up as just pushes. A lot of times it would just depend on the pilot. The Tomcats, Tomcat's a Tomcat. Then I got to fight against the Tomcats with the big GE motors.
Oh, wow.
Definitely fight. But in the end, it's just a big, heavy airplane.
Yeah.
Of course, it's always easy to gauge the energy state when the wings go back and forth.
That's right. And you never have to worry about losing sight of him.
And of course, the Mirage 2000s, I was a little bit disappointed. I heard a lot of good things about flying against those. Did I fly against the worst pilots in the French Air Force, or were they trying to ascertain more what we could do versus showing us? So I just walked away a little bit disappointed and shake my head. Did I get their best fight? I don't know.
Yeah. Dissatisfied. Too bad.
Of course, the Brit F3 Tornadoes, they had us outgunned that, from beyond visual range, but if you made it to that, it's not a turn and burn airplane.
No, I got to fight one of those in the grad 1v1 at Top Gun. And I honestly thought the guy just didn't know the fight was on because, he wasn't doing a whole lot. It wasn't too challenging.
I got to do the grad hop once. Went to Fallon. It's when I was stationed at Cannon Air Force Base. Went up there in a clean Block 40 F-16.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up merging with a Tomcat A model. Yeah, it didn't work out well for him.
No, I bet not. They had some limitations with their engines, but at any rate, what year was that?
It was about 99-ish.
Oh, we just missed each other. I got there in March of 2000.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's good. So you never obviously brought the Fulcrums all the way over? You said there were some, but it wasn't you.
They had modified the first airplane to be able to do that while I was there.
Okay.
And that comprised of is they had to add a GPS-based navigation system on top of the inertial navigation system.
Yeah.
And they had to plumb the airplane to carry wing tanks because not all MiG-29s were plumbed to carry external wing tanks. Just to give it range. And that's one of the limitations of the MiG-29 is how short-legged it is. So we got the first airplane done, and of course we had no performance data on it, how far we could fly. So each one of the instructor pilots in the squadron, and me being one of them, got a couple of profiles to fly. And basically consisted of round robins around Germany at different altitudes, different Mach numbers, just to see how long we could fly and how far we could fly. And my longest sortie in the MiG-29 was a 2.4, and I was happy to get out of an airplane. That seat was uncomfortable.
2.4 is not that long either. That's relatively speaking.
But my shortest sortie was full load of internal fuel. We didn't have any centerline tanks, but took off. Our airspace was right above the field. Started at 7,000 feet MSL and went up to 50,000. And from where we were at, kind of in the middle, about 45 miles north, 45 miles south, and about the same thing east and west. So we took off, full burner, Immelman departure into the airspace, and climbed up to about 18,000 feet and had enough separation between the airplanes. So we started our first BFM setup from there. On the first one, I was defensive, and we swapped roles after that, and then knocked it off, and we were basically still right overhead the field, joined back up, did a split S to initial pitched out and landed. 16 minutes. And we were at divert.
Oh, my goodness. So on the Fighter Pilot podcast, we had an Indian guest come on and talk about the MiG-29. And he didn't take the bait when I said, I think of the Fulcrum as a point defense fighter. If I remember the interview correctly, he said, no, we go out and do offensive stuff a lot. But you sound like you're saying what I was always saying was it had really short legs and was more of you're probably not going to go out and stir up the hornet's nest with this fighter. Yeah.
One of my first tasks from the Germans was to come up with a tactics manual for the MiG-29.
Really?
10 hours in the airplane. So they sat me down in an office with one of the German pilots, and I spoke and he wrote. One of the scariest things I've ever done in flying fighters, because, all right, everything I'm saying is probably not gospel, but you're writing it down as if it is. And so we came up with this. After about 3 weeks, we had a published tactics manual, and how to, set up our avionics, how to set up our self-defense systems, how to run the radar, how we were going to target and sort in different groups, and our intercept flows, and yada, yada, yada. And the thing was, we came up with a tactical range with a centerline tank and a full load of missiles, which consisted of 2 AA-10 Alphas and 4 AA-11 Archers, 150 miles. That was it.
Wow.
That gave us a high subsonic cruise out to whatever we're going to cap. As soon as the center line was empty, it got jettisoned. 2 minutes on station in full burner, and then RTB. Now, obviously, if you weren't using burner, you could stay on station a little bit longer, but
sure.
We go worst case, 2 minutes in burner, head home.
Wow. By comparison, the flanker, I'll never forget. I don't know why I remember this, but I was in the FA-18 FRS, RT, you might call it. And the instructor was one of the guys who was an extra in Independence Day. Remember that? Because they used Marine squadrons. And I was at a Marine squadron, even though I was a Navy guy. And he was talking about, he was in some exercise. I don't know why he was up in like Scandinavia, but he said that some Russian flanker like came all the way down Finland or Norway or something, and like swirled around with them a little bit, and then went all the way up and went all the way home. So, boy, they sure did for the two aircraft that were sort of siblings, right? Because it came out just only a couple of years later, but like you said, there wasn't as many of them.
Yeah,
but I want to say, what your Fulcrum carried like 7,500 pounds, almost like an F-16 two-seater, and the flanker was something like 20,000 internal pounds, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think the MiG-29 was 7,600 pounds internal. The A model, wow. The C model added about 400 pounds to that, which
because of the hump,
about 30 seconds. Probably a little bit more than that, but not much.
Yeah.
But that was my biggest disappointment in the airplane. But of course, they gave up a whole lot of internal volume in the leading edge extensions for the over-the-air intakes or over the top intakes for rough field operations.
That's right.
Take doors close up, and that all happened automatically. You had you start the engine, and at about 35% RPM, the little indicator in the cockpit would show that the intake door would close, and the intake louvers over the top, they just spring loaded. They all operate independently of each other, and just the forces and the suction of the engine around, and all the air going around the intake, they just open. And even at slow speed, if you're flying, those things are flapping around because air spilling over the top of the leading edge extensions.
That used to be something we used to brief. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this, but you just said anyway. Like a way to gauge the energy of the
my experience in Germany, so it's all in class.
There you go, exactly. But so they would like open and close like gills of a fish, right? And that was like, as a guy fighting it, like a cue of its energy state is what I think what we talked about.
Yeah.
Huh. And then those ramps just automatic, right? So
yeah, you could emergency open them. All your engine control switches are over on the left-hand side by the throttle. If for some reason one didn't close, you could emergency open it, but you were limited to 0.8 Mach. Because if they were operating normally, just like the complex intakes of an F-15, I think maybe the F-14 also, those would vary the geometry of the intakes to control the shock wave that's formed in the throat.
Gotcha. All right. How fast did you ever get one up to?
1.7.
Flight. 1.7. Okay.
It was a bad weather day, and we needed to fly. And of course, I had an airplane that didn't have a centerline tank on it. Otherwise, I was limited to 1.5.
Okay.
So took off, got above the weather about 35,000 or so, and then basically did a mock run starting over the Baltic and running south towards Berlin. And 1.7, yeah, it was time to pull it back. And
did you ever get a Eagle or a Viper over 2?
I had an Eagle a few times over 2, fastest ever 2.35.
Wow.
Same plane, 2 flights, same day.
Wow. All right. I had a chance to fly the F-16. Navy's got a handful of them still up in Fallon. Yeah. And I had an A model to 1.93. That was the best I ever did. And then I looked at my fuel, and I was at the far end of the range and said, whoops. And I knocked off with like 1.6 or 7 and still landed with 1.1 or 2 because it was slick. And the thing is just so clean when you come out of burner and come back. But yeah, you were talking earlier about AOA. Man, after years and years and hours in the Hornet where you could just do an AOA excursion, I'd get over the top in the Viper and think, oh, I've been here before. I know what to do now. And I'd want to break that darn stick off. And it would not give me one more half a degree. It would just like, nope, this is all you get. Like, dang it.
Yeah, you don't. At some point, you don't have a vote anymore.
No, yeah. So, but I enjoyed the Viper. But yeah, I can't imagine the Fulcrum must have been a lot of fun. How many hours did you end up with in it?
500 hours.
500, but that was 0.34 at a time, right?
I actually have more sorties. I have more sorties than I have hours in the F5 and the MiG-29.
All the takeoffs and yeah, all the takeoffs and landings equal each other, though. I hope.
Yeah. All takeoffs and landings all equal out.
Good. Was the
thought about jumping out once in an F-16?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was the F-16? No. Was the Fulcrum ejection seat though? I mean, was it well respected, or was it kind of feared a little bit?
The ejection seat?
Yeah, I mean, did people have comfort and it would save their butts?
I've seen a lot of YouTube videos of the ejection seat, the Russian MiG-29 and Su-27 ejection seat demonstration team, because they've obviously dumped a few at air shows. It's a good seat.
Yeah.
It's just comfortable. Again, 2.3 or 2.4, whatever it was I logged.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to get out.
I bet. How about HOTAS, hands-on throttle and stick? You said earlier you had to click over to co-op and a few other things.
You had basically 4 hands-on functions. Radar lock-on, chaff flares over on the throttle, and you could run the acquisition cursor for the radar and the infrared search and track system on the stick, and your brake lock button was on the stick too. That was it. Of course, you had a trim button on the stick, which is
trigger. Yeah,
kind of abnormal. The MiG-29's predecessor, the MiG-23, the trim button was down on the console.
What? That's crazy.
I was offered a couple of chances. Civilian guys that own MiG-23 say, "You want to get checked out?" And from what I know of the airplane, my answer was a definite no.
Yeah. Did you know Brian McCoy? Lasmo? No, was he Lasmo? What was his name? Anyway, we had him on the show. He had a chance to go do the Red Eagle stuff and flew mostly the
I know the name. I don't know him personally.
Okay. We've had a bunch of your folks on the show. Mike Trialday, T-Day. I don't know if you know him. He's an F-16 guy. Like 4,000 plus hours in the F-16.
Wow.
Crazy. We've had him on the show. And then Caesar came on, talked about his 3 kills. But wow. All right. So when you left that, you went back to flying other fighters after that, right?
I went back to the F-16. My primary choice was to go to back to the F-15.
Really?
I already had my 1,000-hour patch in the F-16. Didn't quite make it in the I had 900 hours in the F-15. It'd be kind of unique to have 2,000-hour patches.
Yeah, true.
And I'd also gotten a little lazy. You go over and fly in an air-to-air squadron. Mission planning consists of filling out your lineup card. Where I've seen air-to-ground squadron mission planning is kind of kind of a time-consuming exercise.
Yeah. Did you ever do any air-to-surface in the Fulcrum?
We did not.
Okay.
We tried to talk them into letting us go strafe. There was a tactical range about halfway between us and Berlin. It had a bunch of targets, and the A-10s out of Spangdahlem would go use it, and the air-to-ground guys would go use it. We wanted to go strafe. We wouldn't necessarily want to drop bombs, but let's go strafe. The problem is the gun barrel's life is fairly short, so the staff in Bond said that sounds too much like fun. And, oh, by the way, the gun barrel's short-lived and expensive.
Yeah.
So we didn't get to do that. I saw pictures from the former German guys' HUD snips of them actually dropping bombs off the airplane, describing how it worked.
Yeah.
It was almost like going and dialing in mills, and doing manual bombs.
Wow. Was the aircraft you flew, was it aerial refuelable? Or I thought maybe that was the Fulcrum D or something, but
no, there was a kit that the Germans could have added on. Yeah, I think the Russians figured out capitalism fairly quickly. The MiG-29 was of the weapon systems the Germans had by far the most expensive to operate. So they kind of poo-pooed, the engines, keeping the radars up, and everything else the airplane required. That we don't need to put air refueling probes on them. I think that the mod was about a 90-pound mod total. It wouldn't have cost me it wouldn't have cost much performance-wise, or if anything, but it was just the money, and the Germans, spent a lot of money on defense, and they knew the MiG-29 was going to go away.
Yeah.
By '98, they'd already made that decision and kind of had it planned out for their roadmap of getting the MiG-29 out of the inventory and of course the Eurofighter up and operating.
Sure. Where did they go? Do you know?
The bulk of the fleet, all but one airplane, went to Poland.
Okay.
They sold them for €1 a piece.
Because of some sort of law or paperwork reason, and then sold them something else more expensive.
I felt guilty about September of 1939, whenever invaded Poland.
I shouldn't be laughing, but the feeling guilty part is kind of funny, I guess.
But,
all right.
Anyway, I offered them 5. They're getting over here flying. But they kept one airplane, and it's in a museum near Berlin.
Sure, of course. Well, yeah, there's some companies I think looked into fulcrums and flankers over here, and because of the reasons we talked about before, each one was a little different in the way they were built. I don't think they were very cost effective to try to keep flying.
I test flew the first civilian on MiG-29 to fly.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
In December of 2010, we put a few.
Oh gosh, you've been out of it a couple.
And that airplane's been parked since.
Really? Oh wow. Hey, I think, again, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask some of these. I remember briefing forward firing chaff like out of the gun or something.
Yeah, we'll do that.
You guys did have that? Okay. And then what about, you never did it, but it was a capability?
Yeah, I don't know that we had the rounds or not. Now, I got to shoot the gun at a towed target.
Oh, cool.
We would never, forward firing flares was never part of our discussion. Just the 2 chaff and flare dispensers at the base of the vertical fins.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only thing that we were ever going to load up in my mind. And I also got to shoot missiles off the airplane too.
Did you? Nice.
An entire U.S. Air Force career, the guy's lucky to maybe shoot, unless you're in test, maybe shoot 1 air-to-air missile off an airplane.
Right.
The Germans, we had to shoot something off the airplane, whether it's a gun or a missile, once a year.
Wow.
To maintain our mission-ready status. So we had 2 shoot periods per year, so that guys could go on vacation. They had to plan their lives around, a shoot period. And we'd go out over the Baltic and shoot IR-guided missiles and shoot the gun at towed targets.
That's cool. Was it fairly accurate gun?
I thought it was.
Okay.
The gun sight is a little difficult to interpret, but once you kind of get the gist of it, it's fairly easy to use after that, except unless you're trying to shoot a jinking target. You got to align too many pieces of symbology to do that. Somebody's jinking, you might as well reposition and wait till they run out of energy and try again.
Beat them down a little bit first. How about, you talked about the Alamo. Was there ever anything on the jet for either Adder or the long burn Alamo?
Not our jets. The long burn, the weapons computer is set up so it will accept the long burn. If you put it on the airplanes, it'll recognize it for what it is. And one of the things we did in Germany, I'm not sure how you guys did it in the Hornet, probably the same as we did in the Eagle, but you had a simulator plug that went into the station where you hang an AIM-7 to tell the weapons computer that, hey, there's a missile out here, so do AIM-7 stuff. So what they would put in a rail was a little computer card that would simulate an AA-10. And they had 2 different types of cards, one for an AA-10 Alpha, one for an AA-10 extended range, the ER.
Mm-hmm.
And the airplane didn't care. You usually couldn't the loads, but you put cards in both the inboard missile rails, tell the jet that we were simulating that this missile's out here in the weapons computer. And as soon as you lock somebody up, you would get the display for that weapon. So displayed engagement envelope would be much bigger with the ER than it was with the Alpha.
Yeah, of course.
The chuck.
Yeah, because that was always the big mystery for us is, well, what if this guy shows up with long burns? And so we talked to Nayek at the time, Nazek, I guess now, a lot about what are we seeing out there. So, but
well, certainly the jet would accept it. I think the fear was that because the missile itself is so much longer going aft and also a little bit forward, with the boost sustained motor on the chuck was, you launch it off and it might burn horizontal stabilizer. So I think it would have done that, but I have flown the airplane with the D model body, and obviously the IR seeker head on it, and got to check that out a little bit. But that was not necessarily a go to war type of condition.
That makes sense. All right, Spanky, you've been a good sport. I don't want to take you too long. Plus, I've got a lunch date with my recent high school graduate here at the top of the hour. But let me ask you this. If it sounds like you did in 2010, but here we are in 22. If a Fulcrum showed up at your local airport, you could get right back in and go, you think?
I think so. In fact, I've been waiting on a phone call from President Zelensky. Yeah. They hadn't come yet.
No?
No.
You'd go? It's a worthy cause.
I'd go. I don't know how many G's I could pull anymore. I was out flying an L-39 last in January.
Oh, wow.
Checking a new owner out and, pulling 5 G's. Of course, it's not sustaining like you could do in a
Exactly. Yeah, it's a young person's sport, this dogfighting, I say.
Yeah, it sure is.
Awesome. Well, you're a good sport for being on our happy hour here. I'll send you a link when we get it uploaded. But really appreciate it. And like I said, when I read that classic fighter write-up about, I flew the F-16 and then I went through the Fulcrum and the Eagle and here's how it fights against all this, I thought, here's a guy that needs to come on the Fighter Pilot podcast. So, yeah, you did that. Thank you.
All right, thanks.